On the night of January 23rd at 8 p.m., I was dispatched to the vicinity of Big Run and Gants Road to investigate some bright objects that were hovering in the sky in this vicinity. Upon my arrival, I confirmed that there were two bright objects in the sky, and confirmed this with the radio man. Upon confirmation of the articles being present, the radio man advised myself and Prairie Township Policeman Ed Durbin to stay on the scene and observe and keep track of the movements of these vehicles. From time to time during this sighting, the objects appeared to move back and forth in the southwest section of the sky. From time to time, it's necessary to leave the vehicle to make closer observation of the articles in the sky. In Prairie Township, when we first arrived, the articles appeared to be a pretty good distance away. We were looking at these in an approximate 45-degree angle from the point on the ground that we were located. These objects would be 45 degrees angular elevation in the southeast portion of the sky. Upon first sighting the two objects, they were hovering motionless in the sky. I got out of the car to make a closer observation, and at this time we will refer to the figures that accompany this tape to explain the direction and movements that these vehicles made at this time. The solid black horizontal line on the graph paper represents only a means to show the relationship of these two objects to each other while they were making their movements in the sky. The four vertical red bars represent the old approach lights to Lockwood Air Force Base, which were in sight at this time. Starting with figure number 1, the two objects were at about their farthest point away from my partner and I, and at this time they appeared to be a yellowish or dingy white light with the halos around them in the sky. At this point, one, which I refer to as Unit A, was higher in elevation than the one that we will refer to as Unit B. Sky on this particular evening had a very heavy overcast, not permitting the stars or the moon to shine through them at this time. These two objects were the only two objects visible in the sky that evening. Figure 2 shows that the object we refer to as Unit B moved at a very fast rate of speed, or high rate of speed, upward to become the higher of the two objects. The speed involved here was almost to the point that it was almost impossible to watch with the naked eye. The starting movement was visible, but once it would gain momentum, it was very hard to follow with the naked eye. When we arrived on the scene, it took approximately 3 to 5 minutes for these objects to make their first move. Their standing still appearance led me to believe that the objects may have been either balloons or helicopters until this first movement was made. After the first movement, I had to discount the idea that it was a helicopter or a balloon. In figure 3, object number A, object letter A, made an upward movement and appeared to gain the same elevation or altitude that object B had. Upon reaching this same plane as object B, both objects remained motionless in the sky for approximately 2 to 3 minutes. Figure 4, Unit A moved in an easterly direction, and this movement was made with the same speed that was mentioned before. As the vehicle would start in a direction, the starting movement could be detected very easily, but as it gained momentum in this particular move, it had so much speed that I couldn't follow it with the naked eyes until it did reach its destination, which was approximately directly over the top, or appeared to be directly over the top of these old approach lights for Lockwood Air Force Base. This could have been directly over, or it could have been behind, but I'm almost certain it wasn't between the runway lights and myself at my observation point. In figure 5, the first movement, or downward movement, was observed by my partner and I. At this point, he didn't move with this blinding speed that I speak of before. It more or less left the appearance that he could float, or it could float down toward these approach towers. Again, I have to say I don't know whether this hovered directly over these towers or somewhere behind these towers, but it did have the appearance that it was over the towers at the time. While these movements were taking place by A, B remained stationary and motionless in the sky. After the object A appeared to be hovering hovering over the approach lights. Period of time here would be several minutes. It started in an upward movement, but toward the southeast, represented by figure 6. This time the object did not make a direct move on a straight line as the object had previously. It started at one angle and then broke off, which is illustrated in figure number 7, and headed almost due southeast at this time, till it reached the same elevation as object B. And at this time they resumed their same relative positions as they did in figure 3. The position illustrated in figure 7 was maintained for approximately 2 to 3 more minutes, and then with this blinding burst of speed, they moved in an easterly direction. This time they were moving together, which is illustrated in figure 8. They moved at the same speed, which was this blinding speed, hard to follow with the eyes, until they assumed a position which again appeared to be directly over the top of these approach lights for the base. At this time, when they became directly centered over the top of these approach lights, they stopped and hovered motionless for a period of maybe another full minute. During these maneuvers, there was no sound present as far as the sound that would lead you to believe it was coming from these objects. There actually were no other sounds such as airplanes or any other type of aircraft that could be heard during this sighting. Figure 9 illustrates that units A and B descended. This was the same floating movement as I described earlier. There was no great burst of speed involved in there. At the time these objects finished their downward movement and appeared to be hovering over these towers, I received a transmission from the radio room that Lockburn Air Force Base had been notified of these objects. I was told to stay on the scene and keep them advised of movements and so forth. The position of these two objects, as shown in figure 9, they stayed in this position for approximately 5 to maybe 7 or 8 minutes. They made no attempt to leave during this period of time. Then we noticed sounds from jet airplanes coming into the area. They were coming over our left shoulder from the northwest, going toward the southeast. It left the impression that they were more or less coming over to investigate or to see what these objects were. And at this time, as shown in figure 10, Unit A left with such a burst of speed it was just a fraction of a second that he was completely out of sight. And during this movement, B made no attempt to leave at all. He still hovered over these towers, or appeared to hover over these towers. Then in figure 11, which was just a split second later, B made the same movement that A had earlier. Both of these objects disappeared with such great speed they grew very small in a very short period of time because they were going away from us. This appeared to be at about 45-degree angle. It was out and upward. Jets that I am speaking of were not visible at this time. This would have been more or less due to the cloud cover, I believe. The only way that we had to judge approximate location of these jets was to guess how far ahead of their sound that they possibly might have been moving. They only made the one pass or direct line toward the two objects while they were still visible, and gave me, as I say, the impression that they were going to see what these two objects were. The only time that these objects appeared to change shape were in their close-up and their distance positions. The distance positions in this situation I consider the high positions, and the close-ups would be when they were hovering over the towers. They appeared to be almost perfectly round at their distant location, but as they came down toward these towers, they took on an oblong shape or an egg shape, more or less. Not so much as like a platter or the proverbial flying saucer, but just an oval shape would be a better way to term it, I think. Concerning the color of these objects, at a distance, they had the faint yellow cast to them, like an ordinary light bulb, only it was a bright light, but it had a more or less a dingy cast coming from it. But the closer positions took on an extremely bright light, almost to the point where it was a bluish white. And it left me with the impression on these closer positions, it left me with the impression that had these lights been, say, half as close as what they were, half again as close as what they were, they would have been actually too bright to look at. Concerning the shape of these objects, I couldn't say that they had a definite shape that could be explained, such as framework or something like this. It was just a light in two different shapes. Like I say, I could not distinguish any outline or shape due to the fact that the light was so intense. It left me with the impression that the light was coming from within the object rather than a light that may have been attached to the object. They appeared to be under intelligent control as far as their movements, the way they could move. They seemed to move with definite purpose. In comparing the size of these objects, closest point, the object appeared to be a size that could be covered by holding a nickel up at arm's length, and would have been covered by a nickel at arm's length. At the farthest point, say, as the position they were in when we first arrived on the scene, they could have been covered by a dime held at arm's length.
Appeared as just a bright light, a very bright light, like it would be a fluorescent or the type used in these street lights here in gas type. Very.
This is Marc Candusso from the Flying Saucer Investigating Committee of Akron, Ohio, interviewing a patrolman. What's your name?
Patrolman McCurry.
McCurry. And where do you live, Mr. McCurry? Massillon. And what office do you work out of?
Massillon Barracks.
Massillon Barracks. And your rank is patrolman, right?
Right.
What's your education? What education have you had? High school?
High school.
And special training, huh?
Right.
What's the date of observation?
Tuesday, September the 18th.
September 18th. And what time was it at that?
About 5 a.m.
5 a.m. Eastern, no, daylight saving time.
Right.
And the locality of the observation?
Be between Minerva and Alliance on State Route 80 to junction 153.
I see. And how long did you view the object?
3 to 4 minutes.
3 to 4 minutes. Describe the weather conditions, the type of sky, bright daylight, nighttime, dusk, etc.
Nighttime and clear.
Nighttime and clear. Any moon?
Yes.
Stars?
Yes.
Did you see more than one object?
Yes, 2.
2 objects. Describe the appearance of the objects in detail.
They were bluish white and oblong. When they were at a distance, and then when they came in close, the one came down low and become very bright.
Very bright. Now I'll ask you some other questions later on which will bear on this a little bit more. Did the objects appear to stand still at any time?
Just once.
Just once. And for how long?
About a minute.
About a minute. Did they suddenly speed up and rush away?
Yes.
Did they break up into parts?
No.
Give off any smoke?
When at a distance, it looked like there might be a slight vapor trail. I couldn't say for sure.
I see. Did you drop anything?
Did they?
Did they drop anything?
No.
Did they change brightness?
No, except when the one came down low.
Change shape?
No.
Change color?
No. Right. The one that came down low, it was very bright.
Very bright. But did it change color though?
No, it would turn more or less from a bluish white to a real bright white.
I see. And did the object at any time pass behind anything or in front of anything?
No.
That is an earthly object on the ground?
No.
Was there any wind?
Very little.
Did you observe the object through the windshield or glasses or binoculars or anything like that?
I first observed it through the windshield, then I got out of the car and watched them.
And you've got good eyesight, I suppose.
Right. Have to have.
Was there any accompanying sound?
No, I didn't hear any. It would probably be too far away for me to hear any sound anyway.
Were the objects fuzzy or blurred, like a bright star, or sharply outlined?
No, they were sharply outlined. Except at a distance it would be blurred when it first came up from the southeast.
From the southeast. Did you think that the object had its own light within, or was it reflecting, or dull finished?
No, it had, I would say it had its own light.
Had its own light. Did the object rise or fall while in motion?
No.
Didn't one of them come down?
Except the one that came down, right.
I see. Could you give us the apparent size of the object when compared with the following held at arm's length? A pinhead, a pea, a dime, a nickel, half dollar?
I would say about a dime at a distance, and then when the one came down low, probably could hold a nickel out, and the bright light would still come out around the nickel. Well,
you mean in other words that the lighted area away from the object would have covered even a quarter, possibly?
Possibly.
I see. Did you happen to notice the object? How did you happen to notice the object in the first place?
I just sitting there at the intersection observing traffic, and I just glanced up in the sky and saw them coming up from the southeast.
From the southeast. And could you describe how they traveled towards you?
From southeast to northwest, and after they got over me, they more or less bared off to the northeast and went directly east.
Did they ever stop?
Yes, once. When the one came down low, the other one stayed up high and hovered over.
In other words, they did stop. For how long do you think they stopped?
Oh, approximately a minute.
Approximately a minute.
Yeah.
And they came from the southeast and traveled toward the northwest to begin with?
Right.
And then they changed direction. In which direction? After they hovered and stopped, they went
directly east.
Directly east from there.
Right.
Could you estimate the distance of the objects from you? I know it's a very tough thing to do, but
would
you say they were close or far when they stopped?
Well, when they stopped, they were, maybe the one that was way up, I suppose it'd probably be a mile or more up in the air, maybe more than that. The one that came down low couldn't have been more than, I doubt it could be a half a mile away. It was probably 1,000 feet up, maybe.
1,000 feet.
Possibly.
Did it throw any light on the ground?
No, I don't believe it. It would be too far away for me to see.
I see.
Whether it was on the ground. It lit up enough that it possibly could have.
Now, how did the object disappear from view?
When it came down low, it just lit up like somebody turned the lights on, and they just sort of dimmed out and disappeared directly to the east.
I mean, did they disappear from distance?
No, it more or less seemed to just dim the lights and took off.
And you didn't see them
while suspended there in the air.
After you saw them hover for the minute that you said that they hovered, and one came down toward you, and then finally they changed direction and went the other way to the east, how long did it take for them to disappear?
It'd be no time at all. They just disappeared probably a few seconds.
In a few seconds.
Right.
You say that they disappeared after hovering in the same position. They disappeared in a very few seconds.
Right.
It seemed like a very short time to you.
Yes.
What approximate elevation were they? Were they 30 degrees, 45 degrees when they stopped? Or were they overhead?
No, they weren't overhead. They,
Could you point with your hand? Try to imagine for me.
About this, I suppose that'd be, 30 degrees?
Just about 30, 35 degrees, yes. 30 or 35 degrees. And maybe even less, about 30 degrees.
Yes.
And were there any conventional objects in the sky, like aircraft?
No.
What about afterwards?
None.
And could you compare the speed of the objects once they started as they came from the horizon in the southeast towards you? Were they like a piston craft, like a jet craft, or much faster, or slower?
Much faster.
Much faster than what?
Than jet. They just came up out of the southeast, and in that period of 4 minutes, they came from completely out of sight, clear from the southeast up to where I was at, hovering there, and disappeared to the east.
And when they took off going away from you, did they seem to be going very fast?
Yes.
Faster than a jet?
Yes.
Did you have any other witnesses with you?
No.
Just by yourself?
Yes. At about 7 miles away, there was 2 Minerva policemen that observed it at the same time I did. And then I went to Minerva, checked with them to see if they had sighted the same object I had, and they advised they had, and I asked them what they saw, and they advised that they saw everything that I did, and it did the same thing that what I'm saying right now.
But you were not in connection with one another, telling each other things while you were watching?
No, I went down to check to see if anyone else had seen it or see that I was not.
And you found out then that somebody else had done the same observing you did?
Right.
Is there an airport around the area, military or governmental research installation? Is there an airport around here, close by?
There's one at Akron-Canton Airport, but it's directly west.
Directly west?
Yes.
And you don't think it was an aircraft?
No, I know it wasn't.
I see. Have you ever seen other objects of this nature, unidentified?
Yes, about 10 years ago.
About 10 years ago?
Yes. Saw 7 of them.
7 of them?
Right.
Could you give us just some kind of a quick description of those? Because that seems to be a case in itself.
They also came up directly from the southeast, and they more or less act like they were playing games with each other, and fly around, more or less hover for a while, and then take off. And, they more or less came directly overhead, and then they went directly east also.
Is that right?
No.
In other words, they were like a swarm of bees or a swarm of mosquitoes flying around, or like aircraft making dives and things on each other?
Right.
Mm-hmm. In other words, you thought that they must have been almost like they were just having fun.
Right. They more or less like us playing games.
And how would you describe those objects? Were they just lights in the sky or what?
No, they looked just the same as these here did too. Only they never came down low.
They were high.
Right.
Oh, I see. Did this object that you described for us, that you saw on the 18th here Tuesday, would you describe them as round or just straight oblong? What do you mean by oblong? Like a brick?
No, they maybe not quite as oblong as an egg. You could use an egg and cut it about in half or so, I guess.
Cut it in half? And that
would be at the angle that I was looking at them when they came up out of the southeast. It looked more or less oblong.
In other words, the one side of it was flat, like the cutting an egg in half. Which half? Down the long ways?
Right.
Or the short side?
Right. The long ways.
Long ways. Did you see an actual hump such as that?
No, I didn't see a hump. I
know what you're talking about. You're talking about the oval shape,
right,
aren't you?
Right.
I see. Looking at the flat side.
Right.
You couldn't see any definite shape such as whether it was rounded at the top like a dome or anything like that?
No. It more or less looked to me like just be flat. Only it was oblong.
And there was no material that you could see? Nothing definite, nothing solid like you see on an airplane?
No.
Nothing black, no black things outlined in the back of the light?
No, it was just gray.
Strictly this light?
Right.
I see.
White light.
Mm-hmm. Were you interrogated by anybody else? By the Air Force, federal, state, or county officials?
No, I guess I'm going to be interrogated by Ray Patterson Air Force Base.
You will be?
Right.
Did they tell you when?
No, they said they would get in contact with me.
I see. Well, I'm glad I'm here before they are. Were you told not to discuss this incident by anybody?
No.
Okay. So, may we have permission to put your name? This will encourage others to report similar observations to our group, FSIC. If you prefer, we will keep your name confidential.
Yes, we can use it.
Thank you very, very much. Is there anything that you had in mind at the time when you were watching this object? Could you tell us something about your thinking? Were you befuddled? Were you just surprised, or were you cool and collected as you watched?
I think I was cool and collected. Like I say, I thought I saw them before about 10 years ago, and I saw that movie UFO and some of the actual pictures that were taken in that from the actual films in that movie, these objects compared to those just exactly.
Mm-hmm. Well, we thank you very, very much for your very generous act here of giving us this wonderful interview. And this is Marc Candusso terminating the interview on the 19th of September at around 12 o'clock at night, that is. Thank you very, very much. This is Marc Candusso signing off.
This is Marc Candusso continuing, making some additions after the fact, of course, of McCurry's sighting just described. He said that the object that had come down, the objects had come up from the southeast to a point 35 degrees in elevation, stopped there, waited there for about a half a minute to a minute, and then the left-hand one, the one on the left-hand side, dropped down to an altitude about 1,000 feet from the earth. And I think you heard him say that. And it brightened up considerably. Now, what happened was that it rejoined its partner upstairs and then took off to the east. And this is one of the points that I ascertained after the fact, after this interview. Now, as to the previous interviews on the tape, Delmas Early was interviewed first at the police station in Minerva. And Patrolman Nelson was interviewed at his home outside of Minerva. And they were interviewed, of course, you know the dates. And so all I wanted to point out was that there were independent interviews, every one. Nobody was in the same room. None of the sighters were together in the same room. And another point that has to be made is that none of the sighters themselves notified each other when they were watching these objects. And I suppose that's just about all the comments I have to make. Thank you.
This is Walter Strode, your roving reporter at KSRC Radio in Socorro, New Mexico. We have with us this afternoon Mr. Lonnie Zamora, the Socorro patrolman that while chasing a car found himself in an area about 2 miles west of Socorro and 1 mile east of KSRC radio station, at which time he reports he came upon an unidentified object resting on 4 legs. That as he drew closer, the object took off with a loud roar spouting blue-red flame and disappeared in the sky. A great number of cars and Socorro people have gathered here in front of the studios of KSRC to catch a glimpse of Mr. Zamora as he arrived and welcome him with their car horns. Mr. Zamora, after coming upon this object, just what did happen?
I went up that little road for about half a mile, I guess. Came up to this little barking deal there on the side of the road, and I sort of glanced out of the window, looked to my left, and seen this white object on the ground. So I thought it might be a car that had turned over. So I was the real big Harry going out there to investigate him out and if somebody would be hurt. That time I saw this white egg shape little object left.
It looked something like an egg, you mean?
Yeah, from the distance I was, it looked like an egg to me.
About the size of a car, I think someone said.
Yes, sir, it looked like a car had turned over. That's why I say it's the size of a car.
And did it have any kind of markings on it of any kind that you noticed?
Yes, it did. Not from that far, I didn't see the markings. When I went up closer to it, I did see the markings.
And someone said that the markings, as you saw it, was an upside-down V with 3 lines running through it.
No, sir, I couldn't tell you that because they still don't want me to say nothing about the markings.
They don't want you to say anything about the markings. All right, we won't question you on that. And if we run into an area that they don't want you to talk about, well, you just say so. And this happened about 5:30 Friday afternoon.
It happened about 5:50, about 10 minutes to 6.
About 10 minutes to 6. And you did place a call in to Sergeant Chavis of the State Police to come on out and help you with the investigation.
As soon as I saw this object, I didn't know what it was. I placed a call to Sergeant Chavis of the State Police. Told him if he would come out there and help me on this. He said, yes, I'll be right there in about a few minutes.
And he arrived just about 2 or 3 minutes after the object had taken off and left.
Well, the object was still about top of the mountains up there whenever he arrived.
It was still, that's the direction it went. It went up over the top of the mountain. And we've heard several reports that it flew low, like it was dragging something, and we've heard some...
It was very low to the ground. At the time I was seeing it, it was very low to the ground, up to the perlite mill there, and then it started gaining altitude.
Now, also, it was reported to me that when you first drove up into this area and sighted this object, that the motors were running and it was going bzz, 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 or some such sound as that. Is that correct?
I couldn't say because it happened so fast. I started running and I was scared.
Well, I don't blame you. There's thoughts of it even scares me yet. Now, you did say that you saw... two what appeared to be people dressed in white uniforms with, did they have helmets on like spacemen or anything?
No, sir, I wouldn't say they were people. I saw something white coverall, that's what I could say.
They looked like they were something in white coverall.
Right.
But you couldn't identify them as actually being a human being as you and I are.
No, sir, I couldn't.
But you didn't know whether they turned and saw you or what then?
Well, I would say that this white object turned and saw me. Yes.
Were they two of them?
I would say there were two because one was in front and the other object was in back.
Did you have a chance to notice what kind of a doorway they had to this object, this flying object?
Didn't notice any doors, no.
And when that took off, it made a loud roaring sound. Is that?
Yes, sir. It did very loud noise, roar sound.
And then after it got up in the air about 20 feet, well, the sound seemed to disappear.
The sound was disappeared and was very, very quiet. We could hear a pin drop there.
And now the markings it left on the ground. Now the reports that I have had, and I haven't had a chance to go and take a look, and the winds yesterday have probably spoiled a lot of that anyway, was that they were deep indentations in the ground, approximately 10 inches wide and 6 to 8 inches deep, about 15 feet apart. Is that a correct report?
Well, I would say it was about 19 feet apart of the prints.
And were there any other prints, like footprints around the area right after the takeoff, or when you were making the investigation?
There were some prints, but I wouldn't know if there were footprints or anything, just prints, I would say.
You couldn't identify them as actually being a footprint, just indentations like maybe somebody might have walked there or something might have walked there.
Somebody walked around there because when I got there was nobody around there yet.
Now, there was, according to a report on one of the news, the television stations in Albuquerque, claimed that they had a call just about 5:30 in Albuquerque of a sighting of a flying object flying in this direction. Did you hear anything about that?
No, sir, I didn't.
Which, if that be true, means that someone in Albuquerque saw this object flying in this direction just prior to your sighting it. And which corroborates the fact that there was something here. Now, it's the feeling, I get the feeling, at least, Lonnie, with the people that I've talked to, and they were out in the area, that they are quite sure that something landed there and something took off from this spot because of not only the imprints that it left in the ground, but the fires that it started and the method of which the fire or the power that it was, whatever it was using, kind of spread itself as it took off. Is that right?
Right. I know there was something out there because I seen it.
And what was your immediate reaction as soon as you realized that this thing might be an object from outer space?
Well, I didn't think it would be an object from outer space because I don't believe in things like this from outer space.
Well, it was something that you'd never seen before, and right. It was enough to scare you to run in the other direction.
Well, what scared me was the loud noise and the flame that it had under it.
It had a large flame then as it took off. Was it a yellow flame or?
It was a bluish orange flame. I thought this object was going to blow out. That's why I started running back.
And did you notice whether these arms that it was sitting on retracted back into the object as it flew away or not? You didn't have time. And so I just running in the other direction at that time. I would have done too. Are there any other things about this sighting that you think our listening audience might be interested in, or something that you'll be allowed to tell us?
No, that's all I saw.
And did it disappear into the high sky after it got over around the perlite, or just
yes, sir. It flew low to the perlite mine. Then from there on, it just so fast that you could barely
right straight up in the air.
You have to be paying attention to what you were looking at to see what it was doing.
Well, do you think we're going to get any more of them around here?
Hope not. Not to me, anyway.
Well, it was quite an interesting experience, I'm sure, and it has caused an awful lot of comment. Did the investigators that were called in make any comments at all in one direction or the other, with the exception of that they do not have any such object in this area?
Oh, they're still puzzled themselves, yes.
And there's been no report on the samplings they took of the area around there from the burning brush and the area that the blast hit the ground. That might give them a clue as to what kind of power was being used on this.
No, sir, no.
Well, I think I've just about covered it here. Let's see. It wasn't dragging anything. We had a report that it was dragging something as it led.
No, I wouldn't say it was dragging nothing, just low to the ground.
And you can't think of anything else then about the sighting of this flying object that our listening audience might be interested in?
No, that's all I'll say now.
Well, Lonnie, I'm sure you've been getting an awful lot of questions and a lot of inquiry. I imagine you're beginning to get a little tired of it, actually, for so many people calling and asking you about it. Maybe this will be one way to keep too many people from having you have to go through the story over and over again.
Right.
Well, it's been a real pleasure talking to you, Mr. Lonnie Zamora. This is the gentleman, the Socorro Patrolman, that Friday at around 10 minutes to 6 come up on an object, a flying object, an unidentified flying object, as the government prefers to call them.
Excuse me, Walter, I got some military people at the sheriff's office who want to talk to me now. I believe they're from UFO.
Well, you have some military people that are here from UFO to talk to you right now and to ask you some more questions about this. And they have not in any way tried to indicate that they didn't want us to cover this type of maneuver.
No, sir, I just told them I was going to come here and talk to you on the radio station. That's all right.
Well, that's fine, and we would be interested in knowing what they think about it if they will allow it, and after you get through talking to them, if you would call us back here at KSRC and to give us some of the information that they might allow you to let us broadcast.
We'd be glad to.
All right. And Mrs. Zamora, I hope that you don't come upon any more of these objects unless we find out exactly what they are. So it's been a pleasure, Mr. Zamora, having you in our studios, and we want to thank you, and I know our listeners thank you, and this is expressed by the great number of cars that are out here in front of our studios just to get a glimpse of what we might call a Socorro celebrity right at the moment.
Thank you again, Mrs. Zamora. It's been very nice having you in our KSRC studio. You've just been listening to a KSRC radio special featuring an interview with Mr. Lonnie Zamora, the patrolman here in Socorro, that sighted a unidentified object that flew away when he drove up on it.
In Spanish, it called is a P upside down.
Ray Stanford speaking. I'm at the office of the Defensor Chieftain in Socorro, New Mexico. I have just talked to a gentleman here who was on the site Saturday morning, some hours after the occurrence, while the imprints were still very clear. and I want to ask him some questions. I wonder if he could tell us his name first.
Louis Reidel. I'm publisher there, Defensor Chieftain.
Regarding what was seen by you at the site, did you see the indentations or tracks while they were still very fresh?
Yeah, I was there early the next morning, and that was Saturday morning, and before hundreds of people had gotten a chance to obliterate all the tracks.
What was your impression of these tracks? Do you think they were made by a heavy object, or by a light object, or by digging out, or what?
I would say a heavy object coming down very slowly and made a 4 or 5 inch depression in comparatively hard sand there in the draw.
And these were longer than they were wide?
About 12, I would guess, about 12 inches long and 3 or 4 inches wide.
And equally deep, perhaps running to the center in a wedge. Was that the description that was accurate on this that I've heard?
Well, probably a little deeper on the south side, the north side of the way it landed. From his description, the front of the plane, or the object, I'll put it that way, was facing south. And the way it landed on uneven ground, there seems to be heavy indentions on the south side, which indicates that more of the weight was there.
Yes, this would be logical to me because, as I recall from being there this morning, the south side is downhill. It kind of slants upward to the north, so there might actually be more weight on the south side if it were an object balancing, sitting on these legs. Was this your observation too?
Yes.
Now I hear there were 2 little indentations off to one side, to the west side, sort of parallel with with one of the lines made by 2 of the 4 legs. Did you see these 2 indentations yourself?
Yes, I did. Someone in the crowd, it was only 4 of us, one of them made a remark that it possibly footprints, or if you want to describe it, more of a hoof print, but that wasn't the impression that I had of the thing, and we decided in our story, in our newspaper, that we wouldn't go into that too deeply. It sounded a little preposterous.
I see. How close were these to the line formed by the 2 nearest footprints, we'll call them, left by the object, leg prints? How close were they to the line made by the 2 nearest footprints?
Well, they were practically in the center between the 2 indentions made by the legs on the west side.
Yes.
And they probably 36 inches, about a yard.
Were they in parallel with that line made by the 2 legs?
No, they were, yes, they were parallel, I'm sorry.
Yes. Now, we won't speculate as to what these were. I was wondering, it was on the same side that Zamora told me that he had seen some figures from a distance in white coveralls. Did he tell you about these figures?
Yes. Yes, they were on the same side, those indentions in the ground, the round holes, indentions.
In talking to Dr. Heine, he implied that Zamora told him nothing specific at all about seeing any men, implied he hadn't even mentioned any men. He later seemed to come down and say that he mentioned coveralls after very pointed questioning by one of the persons who was present. But did, in this talk with Zamora, soon after the sighting, since you were one of the first to be there, did he mention to you that he actually saw men or just coveralls?
He very definitely did. He said there were 2 there. Now, he didn't say anything about them being men, but you naturally think so, because he said that he, when he was still in the car, that one of them, both men or objects, had their back to him, and one of them turned around and looked him squarely in the face. That was his exact words. And he very definitely said that he saw two men there at the object. And he said that immediately they disappeared and apparently got in the plane from the side, from the west side, and the plane lifted up and started off.
That's an interesting thing. I just noticed from the west side, this is pretty speculative, but if they got in on the west side, wasn't it where you saw these two circular indentations at the west side?
Yes, that's right. And
would you say these were at a position where, with speculation, we might think it could have been some stairs that had been folded down, that had touched down there? Did this look like it could have been this to you?
Yeah, it's possible. I thought that later when I got to thinking about it, and you don't ordinarily think of men with hoofs or anything like that, so I presumed that. But the remarkable part of it is that there was no other tracks there.
Yes. I could think that if the men were small and childlike, as one report said, did he tell you that they were childlike?
Yeah, well, that was his description telling us that they were small. That's the way he was.
I would think if they were that small, maybe overnight their footprints might have been destroyed by a little breeze or something.
Well, they could have.
The heavier ones would have remained a little more. So, well, it's only speculation, but maybe these things were associated with a ladder of some sort. At least this might give us a reason to why they were on the west side of the object, since we know that, according to Zamora's report, this is where the men disappeared into the object, was on the west side. Now, would you say that Zamora was still rather excited Saturday morning when you were there?
No, he got over that part of it.
Zamora impressed me as a very calm and level-headed sort of fellow, not subject to imaginative spells or hallucination. Would this be your impression of him, and from the people's knowledge of him here in town, would you say this seems to be a general impression?
Very definitely.
Good. Well, I think that this will help me out in getting the details of this case on record, since I may not have time to talk to all of these things with Mr. Zamora, who's been bothered a lot by everyone questioning him and calling him on the telephone, and I certainly need your help.